Once a month, Paula Pant, host of the Afford Anything podcast, answers voicemail questions the listeners send in. Here's one now.
Hi, Paula. This is Heather. Thank you for your podcast. I'm very inspired by you. In fact, I have created a fund and am ready to purchase my first rental property. I'm planning to start a business similar to yours where it's a buy and hold strategy, long-term rental, and hopefully I'd buy, one a year for, I don't know how many I'd do, but start with one. My question is, when there are personal assets at play, where in terms of my husband and I, our savings, I'd love your advice on how to structure the purchase of a rental property. Would you do LLC? What are the pluses and drawbacks of that? Would you do it in your own name and have a certain amount of liability insurance? Is there another structure that I'm not aware of? We are able to purchase the properties we're looking at in cash. However, my husband strongly prefers, in terms of the amount of our portfolio he'd want to put towards this right away, he'd prefer to finance it with 25-30% down. But I'm just mentioning that optionality in case it changes. Any advice you have? Obviously, we will speak with a lawyer about our specific situation, but you've been amazing and inspirational to me, so I really wanted to get your thoughts. Thank you.
Heather, this is a really interesting question because the question on its face, on the surface, is how should I structure this? But if you zoom out, the broader question that I think you're actually asking is, how can I minimize liability? And here's what I mean by that. So your specific question is, all right, so how do I structure this? Do I put them in an LLC? Do I hold them in my own name? So the reason that I say, hey, let's zoom out is, what's the goal of asking why you're structuring it? The goal is you want to figure out how to minimize liability, right? So let's start there. Let's look at the menu of options that could potentially reduce liability. And that menu of options include holding properties in an LLC could potentially reduce liability. Having a large umbrella liability policy could do so. This is a big one. Making sure that everything in the house is code compliant. Like, for example, let's say that the house has an outdoor deck with an old set of stairs in which the rise or the run of the step is no longer up to modern building standards. If someone falls down those stairs, they could come after you for having shoddy stairs that aren't compliant with municipal building codes. So making sure that everything in the house is code compliant, that could minimize liability as well. Another thing that could minimize liability is using only licensed, bonded, and insured contractors, so that if you do have to defend any of the work that's been done on the house, you can point to the fact that you used a legitimate contractor rather than just some guy on Craigslist. So I realize I sound like I'm veering off topic right now, but the point that I'm trying to make is that I just named 4 different options that could potentially allow you to reduce liability. So an LLC is one. The large umbrella liability insurance policy is another. Making sure that your property is code compliant is a third. And using licensed, bonded, and insured contractors is a fourth. Those are 4 ways to reduce liability. And so the question really becomes, if your goal is to minimize liability, the question becomes, what are the pros and cons of each option? And what trade-offs are you willing to accept? So to go back to your original question, which was how should I structure this? What that question is asking is, what are the pros and cons of structuring a property in an LLC? And when we zoom out and we talk about minimizing liability, we talk about the pros and cons of holding properties in an LLC with regard to how they fit into the overall liability reduction motif. Does that make sense? I feel like sometimes when I talk into the microphone, here's the thing, I'm totally alone in an empty house just talking to myself in a microphone. So because I'm not getting any kind of feedback, there's nobody's no facial expression, no vocal intonation. Sometimes I just have no idea if I'm veering into crazy talk or not. So I hope that what I'm just saying, I hope that what I'm saying right now sounds sensible. To cut a very long story short, if your goal is to minimize liability, personally, this is not legal advice, so those are, standard disclaimers. Personally, the first thing that I myself rush to do is make sure that I have a solid umbrella liability policy in place. That's number one, because those are cheap and they can really save your butt. As to the specific LLC question, there are a bunch of pros and cons. Like, if you want to secure financing for a property, it's going to be a lot easier to secure that financing if you buy that property in your own name rather than through an LLC, assuming that you're getting conventional financing. If, on the other hand, you're buying a property in cash, then that's no longer a con. So if you're buying the property in cash, then sure, you can create an LLC, have the LLC hold all of the funds, and then purchase that property through the LLC. Absolutely. If you do get financing for a property and you buy it in your own name, you can, after the purchase, assign the property into an LLC through what's called a quitclaim deed. So that's another option as well. But you see here, we're getting into a whole bunch of pros and cons where whether or not you opt for LLC designation is no longer merely a function of liability reduction. It's also a function of how will you qualify for financing, and are there property taxes in your state that are assessed when a transfer is done through quitclaim deed? Now, here's the thing. If you file a quitclaim deed, you expose yourself to a different type of risk, and this type of risk is known as the due on sale clause. Many conventional mortgages have a clause in it called the due on sale clause. And what it states is that if the property is transferred to a different owner, the entire balance of the mortgage becomes due. And what that means is that technically, if you were to transfer the ownership of the property from your own name into the name of your LLC, then according to the way that many mortgages are written, and of course your mortgage may vary, that event might trigger the due on sale clause, which means that the bank or the lender would have the ability to call the entire mortgage note whenever they want. Which in layman's terms, like, they can make you pay the whole thing back right away if they find out. Now, that being said, there are many investors who are just kind of flippant about the due on sale clause because it's rarely enforced. And again, you're comparing pros and cons. You're looking at trade-offs. It's the very kind of heart and soul of Afford Anything, is deciding which is your priority and then figuring out what's more important to you. And in this case, what you're really doing is you're figuring out which type of risk you're more comfortable with. There are many investors who say, you know what, I'm more comfortable putting my properties into an LLC, and I'm willing to risk invoking the due on sale clause in order to do so. Likewise, there are also many investors who feel the opposite, who say, you know what, I don't think that transferring my properties into an LLC will adequately reduce liability enough that the supplemental risk, the due on sale risk, is worth it. And therefore, for that reason, I choose not to quitclaim my properties over. So that's a choice that you've got to make, right? Like, at heart, this is a risk management decision. That's part of the reason why I can't give you a simple answer, because I can't decide your risk tolerance or your risk comfort level for you. I can give you the facts, give you some of the information, basically I can give you a framework, and within that framework, you've really got to decide what trade-offs you're willing to accept. Which type of risk are you more comfortable sitting with? And you know what? This is what makes it hard when somebody leaves a comment on the blog, or when I'm at a conference and somebody very casually says, like, well, do you hold your properties in an LLC? The question that they're asking me is, what do I do personally with my own properties? But the question that they're really trying to ask, the question that I know that they're getting at is, what should they do with theirs? And again, there isn't a simple answer that I can give, because it's complicated, as you can see. It depends on what type of financing you're getting. It depends on which type of risk you're more comfortable sitting with, because, if you do get conventional financing and you have to buy it in your own name, all of a sudden now you have to make a decision that weighs two different types of risks against each other. Those are all things that you would need to consider, and those don't get neatly summarized into the question that I often get at, I'll be at like a cocktail party at a conference and people are like, so do you hold your properties in an LLC? And I'm like, I don't want to mislead them, right? Like, I don't want to give them a quick, flippant answer, but I know that there are so many more factors to consider than what one random person who's holding a cocktail at a party has done. So sometimes I'm not sure exactly how to convey that into like a quick cocktail party soundbite. At any rate, I guess what I'm really saying is that when you ask what's the best way to structure a deal, there are multiple factors that you would want to consider, liability reduction being one of them, but not the only one. Yes, in many cases, an LLC can reduce liability, but if that is your primary goal, don't forget to look at other options for that as well. Again, this is not legal advice. This is not insurance advice. This is just some person on the internet speaking into a microphone. So please take this with a grain of salt. Take it as you will. But that is the framework that I would use if I were you in determining whether or not you should structure your properties with an LLC. Okay, I'm going to cut myself off there. Thank you so much, Heather, for asking that. And best of luck with everything that you're doing.
Hey, did you enjoy this excerpt from the Afford Anything podcast? Then be sure to subscribe to Paula's YouTube channel. Not only is every podcast episode and Ask Paula question released here on YouTube, other creative deep thought videos are created just for you. Remember, you can watch anything, just not everything. Fill your YouTube viewing time with more videos to make you think and grow so you can afford anything. Go ahead, hit that little red subscribe button. We'll take care of the rest.